on. There we go. I am so excited today to have with us Heather Pierce Campbell. She is a fabulous attorney, has very exciting things to talk about, and is really, you know, we use the term, thinking out of the box, outside of the box. We use that term a lot, but she truly does. And I think you are all going to be fascinated by what you hear about how she has developed not only her law firm business, but a whole parallel related business, very much related to the practice of law, but not what you see in traditional law firms or what lawyers are traditionally doing. So, but let me tell you a little bit about her, and then we're going to jump in. Heather is a warrior mama, a nature lover, and a dedicated attorney, as well as a legal coach for world-changing entrepreneurs. She's a mom to two little munchkins and the founder of Pierce Law, PLLC, which is the home to her legal practice. But she's also the creator of the Legal Website Warrior, an online business that provides legal education and support to information entrepreneurs, such as coaches, consultants, online educators, speakers, and authors around the world, as well as in the US. She's also the host of the Guts, Grit, and Great Business podcast, and I'm thrilled to have her with us today. So Heather, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be connecting with you, Sharon. When I first heard our mutual friend Melanie talk about your work and leaving law in order to coach other women, I just thought, oh, it's what we need. It's what so many people need. So I'm a fan of what you do, and I'm super happy to be connecting with you today.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So I want to jump right in and have you tell us all about what you're doing. So can we just start a little, really from the beginning? How did you start your own law practice, and why did you do that? And then we'll get into your second business.
Yeah, absolutely. So it goes clear back to my personal story in law school. And when I started law, I went to UW here in Seattle, which is where I'm still based. Within a couple months of starting my first year of law school, my mom was diagnosed with glioblastoma. And so that's a deadly brain cancer. It's, as soon as you have that diagnosis, it's a matter of usually months, not years. Sometimes, people can live up to a couple of years, but it really changed everything about our lives. I came from a tight-knit family, 6 kids. I was the second oldest. I still had siblings at home that were, in junior high. And let's see. Yeah. Henley would have been in middle school at the time. I mean, Haley would have been at middle school at the time. And so, yeah, it was just a really, really hard time of life. And, like a lot of families, mom was the glue. And so my first year of law school was really an anomaly. I considered dropping out. My parents, of course, said no. And so instead I spent Monday through Wednesday in class, and I drove 4.5 hours across the state every Wednesday evening, and I spent Thursday through Sunday at home in Walla Walla.
Wow.
And that was my entire first year of law school. So I did the law school experience in 3 days a week when everybody else had 7 days to do that. And that was just my reality. I refused to open a book. Like when I was home with my family and with my mom, I did not do any school. I literally packed it into those 3 days. And so my perspective about where school fit and law school generally was just much different. And that truthfully ended up shaping the rest of my law school experience, and then also shaping my decision-making when I finished law school about what I was willing or not willing to do.
So when you finished, what did you decide?
So my third year of law school, and I will just say this about, those times of deep grief and lots of stress in life, is that other things, like I just became the person that didn't have any other stressors. It was like, if it didn't measure up to the level of somebody dying or being a real stress, I just couldn't really be bothered to stress out about it. So even law school exams, like I think other people were like, what is wrong with this person? I would like pack a picnic and have snacks and just like I was kind of like, well, we're just going to do this thing and I'm not going to stress about it. And if I needed to go walk around and take a mental break, I would just go do that. And so I have not fit very well within kind of the traditional approach, even to law school from the beginning, but that partly was not by choice, right?
Yeah.
Part of it was by choice. But when I went to graduate, actually my third year of law school, I saw very quickly that people would come into law school with big ideas and they'd quickly get funneled down into either, big law firm work, government work, or maybe, small mid-sized firms or smaller practices. But it was really like you had 2 or 3 choices is how it felt. And I took an issues and solo practice class my third year of law school. And it was just so intriguing to me, like, some people do this. Not very many people right out of law school. That was, this was 2002 when I graduated, and that was pretty unheard of at the time. But when I graduated, 9/11 had also just happened. And so the market was in a really crazy place. I'd spent the summer before working for the British government. So I actually went to London. I had a strong interest as well in international law, and I'd worked for the Audit Commission in London, and which was great experience for me, combining like financial background and legal stuff. But it didn't lead to local connections or local work. And so it was just a fit that looking at that year, enjoying my issues in solo practice class, and just thinking like, this other stuff, I interviewed at big law firms. I did all of the typical stuff where I examined opportunities, and I had those opportunities, and they were not a fit for me. I did not want to be shoved in some small office or cubicle and be told what I was going to be working on. I wasn't interested in drafting cell phone tower leases. Like there were just things that I was like, no, that, I watched my mom die young in her 40s, and I'm just not willing to do other people's work. So that's how I felt. And I launched my own practice right out of law school.
And good for you for recognizing that about yourself and being able to honor yourself and say, no, I'm not going to take that path. I'm going down a different road. So when you get out of school, you hang out your shingle, right? And so what kind of work were you doing when you first started?
Oh my gosh, the hanging out your single part, I just laugh. Like what that meant for me, I will describe it and people can have a chuckle with me, is I was renting a basically like a single bedroom, little apartment at the time, a studio apartment. And I literally put a divider up so that my desk was not like part of the entire room. This is, like we were emailing, but I created letterhead. I printed my own little business cards. Like I literally, I created an Excel database, like my own Excel spreadsheet. And I didn't have connections in the legal world. I didn't come from a family of lawyers. I literally knew nobody in law, nobody. And I didn't have connections in Seattle. So it was literally from the ground up that I had to build this. And I just told myself, you know what? I am not afraid of people. Work comes from people. Like that's it, regardless of what the economy is doing, regardless of what other people say you can or can't do. I had friends at the time, other law school graduates that were still sending out resumes, the ones that had big job offers and got those all reneged, right? They were like, sorry, here's $10,000, go away. We're shuttering our doors for the time being. So it was just a really weird time. But for me, it was a really busy, good time because I was not afraid of people. And so I put myself on a schedule. I told myself I have to get face-to-face, literally, and this meant pre-Zoom, literally face-to-face with a local attorney at least once a day, Monday through Friday. And, sometimes I took Fridays off, I'll be honest. It took a bit of effort to get those face-to-face meetings, but I wasn't afraid to do it. If an attorney ended up in the newspaper, I would just call them. If somebody, if I was given a name from another attorney or even a law school classmate about somebody who had expertise in a certain practice area, I'd research the heck out of them and then just reach out and say, hey, can I meet you for coffee? I'd be really interested in hearing about your practice area. And I did this for a couple months, got face-to-face with a new attorney every day. And within, I would say by that fall, because I'd passed the bar exam, right? You get your results, I think in October, early November, but I had already been, making these face-to-face connections for a month. And I had research projects. I had other attorneys sending me work before I'd even passed the bar. And there was a point where I was just too busy. I had so much work, I couldn't keep doing these face-to-face meetings.
Oh, that's a good problem, right?
It's a good
problem.
It's a good problem, but I was doing really what nobody else at the time was doing. I wasn't sending off resumes. I was emailing my network. I was sending out traditional letters, traditional business cards to my network saying, hey, I've graduated, I've passed the bar, or I think I have. And, I'm ready for work. I'll help you with any projects or, research issues or letters. I mean, I literally made myself available for anything just for the experience. And I got it.
That's great. That's great. So, but at some point you narrowed your focus, obviously.
That's right.
In your law practice. So, so how did that come about?
Yeah, well, what happened early on is I had a combination of my own clients, often on small projects, often related to small businesses. And then I also got a lot of experience in conjunction with firms that hired me as a contract attorney, but for years at a time. Like I worked on massive litigation, real estate, construction defect, zoning, land use regulation, all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And, as a lot of people know, business and real estate often go hand in hand. If you're working in one, sometimes you're facing issues with the other. And so that was the bulk of my experience early on in my career. It was litigation, real estate, and business oriented. And it was funny because I got job offers to come on board and become permanent employee. And I always said no. And, I got interviewed because there was a firm who knew about my work and asked me to come in and interview. And when I did, and they actually had mostly a condominium practice, they were like, okay, well, and once they learned about how I was running my practice, they were like, yeah, why would you do anything differently? And what ended up happening is I'd ask them, well, how is your firm for women? Just flat out. And first of all, the women would only answer that question in private. So when I had a private meeting with one of the women on the hiring, committee, and I asked her again, how has this firm been for you as a woman? And she just said, not great. And I said, that's all I need to know. Thank you for your time. And that pretty much concluded my interest in, learning anything else about that. But so there were times where I reconsidered, like, should I be? And the answer was always no. And so I continued on my path, but I always felt that based on the way that I worked, based on the clients that I supported, I always kind of had an outsider's view of the marketplace. So what ended up happening is I would coach, I would get referrals from other people that had graduated UW for people that were looking for work and couldn't get it. And so I ended up coaching quite a few new attorneys and young attorneys on how to look for work, but also how to create their own work. And then what ended up happening with enough time is I was then getting partners who were leaving law firms reaching out to me and saying, how did you create this amount of work? How did you do this? Right. And so I could see that the system didn't work for a lot of people. It didn't work for a lot of attorneys. It certainly doesn't work for a vast majority of clients who are underserved, both individual and small business clients. And I just had this perspective where I felt like I could always view what did not work about the model, including the traditional law firm model. And it was just not interesting to me to recreate that or be much a part of, making that part of the system persist.
Okay. So you're clearly, not a lawyer who is going to fit in with the firm in a good way. You got your own practice going. And then at some point you develop a whole nother business to go along with that practice. So tell us a little bit about the Legal Website Warrior and how it came about and what it really is.
I love it. And looking back, it's one of those stories which most of us have in some way in our life where you just can't tell where the dots are connecting moving forward. But looking backward, you're like, oh, it's so obvious why this happened and how this happened. For me, there was a big transition when I went to start the journey to motherhood, right? So I got married. We knew we wanted children. One of my goals, even from the very beginning, was to create a practice that regardless of what I did on the personal side, if I became a mom or whatever, that I'd have flexibility and I'd have freedom. And so, it was one of those times where I just realized like, okay, I should probably really get myself situated for this. If kids are on the way, I need to have a full home office. I need to do some things that make that transition easier. And so I did. And it wasn't very much longer. And I've always been somebody who loves business. I love business conversations. I love problem solving around business. I love helping people in real estate with their businesses. Like business has just always been one of my, areas, very strong interest areas. And so it's no surprise that when I went to really focus creatively, and this is where I just decided there's a whole different way that I can be supporting people. What is that way? And it was just really sitting with that for a while and exploring. Mostly what I did is I looked outside of law. I looked at what other businesses were doing and what the marketplace was doing and what the information space was doing. And I realized I need to intersect my clients. These are small businesses. I've always loved the information entrepreneur world. And when I say information entrepreneur, it's going to be coaches, consultants, experts, online educators, speakers, authors, people who are really transforming the lives of others through the information that they create or the body of work that they put together. And they are tremendously underserved by the traditional legal marketplace. And so I just thought I need to meet them where they are. They live in the online information space. I need to create a business that lives and thrives there and intersects them at the point in their journey where they're willing to be educated and get some help before they incur these problems that can really be problematic for their business.
Mm-hmm. So take us a little bit on that journey. Mm-hmm. You decide they're online. I need to be online. What were your next steps?
Yeah, the funny part about that journey is that my business to date, right? And that was, really, it was over 10 years into my career. Mm. I hadn't built an online business. My business was entirely built face-to-face and word of mouth, like the opposite of what you think of when you think of an online business. And so there was a part of me that had a laugh about that, like, all right, here we go. And the other thing that I think is ironic, but not too ironic, is that my online business has mostly been built through the exact same mechanisms: relationship building, face-to-face conversations, and referrals. And so, it really is true that like certain principles in business just never fail you.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you have to build those relationships, that trust, community, all of it. And you're right, whether your business is online or offline, it's exactly what you need to do. So one of the things, Heather, can you explain a little bit about what you actually offer in your online business?
Yeah. So when I built the legal website Warrior, and it took me about a year to formulate the name, the concept, the niche, like specifically where it would fit in the marketplace. I did a lot of thinking about it, but then once I decided to pull the trigger on some things, it was just like, it was ready. It was ready to be birthed. It was ready to be created. And I got some business coaching early on that was phenomenal. And my business coach said, well, who is it that you think you can serve? And I was like, oh, and I just listed people in the marketplace. And let's be clear, these are like top of the industry leaders. Like these are the types of clients that I can serve. And he's like, so right now you could serve them. I was like, yeah. He's like, okay, so just go get those clients. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess, and there was still part of me settling into this idea that somehow online business was going to be different than traditional business, you know. And then I realized, like, oh no, it's entirely about relationship building. And I just began again my own little outreach campaign, like I had started at clear back at the beginning of my career, reaching out to people, letting them know, you know, what I knew about their business and how I could support them. And for me in the online space, I could quickly get a good grasp for what people were up to. And I'm pretty adept at assessing what level of supports they have in their business based on what I'm seeing online. And, you know, you learn in the legal space to do your research, which I've always been good at. And so the timing was just right. I ended up, even before I ever had a website, these clients hiring me under this new business model to create documentation and support their business in ways that I knew I could. And it, you know, it really was just the intersection of the right offer, the right time, the right service. The marketplace needs it. And so later the website followed. So Legal Website Warrior, my second business, it is really an online information business that has bundled education, which include resources, video tutorials, templates, etc., very targeted to, again, this narrow niche in the marketplace that I serve: experts, consultants, coaches, online educators, speakers, authors, people that are building personal brands. And their businesses, by and large, look very, very similar. The way they deliver their information or services, etc., follow certain set paths. The way these businesses grow follow certain set paths. And so these resources and offerings are really very targeted to that kind of business.
So one of the things that doing the research myself on what you were doing, one of the things that struck me, because I was looking at the Legal Website Warrior site, and you have different levels of support that you can provide. And one of the levels is, this is my description, okay? Sort of a do-it-yourself, give me the information, give me the templates, okay? And what really struck me about that was this. I remember when LegalZoom came into the market. Now, what you do is at a higher level, my opinion, certainly than LegalZoom, but I remember when they came into the market, and they're still here, and lawyers are complaining, terrified. What does this mean? How can they do it? No, this is going to take my, etc. Okay, it was all very negative, and it just struck me that you embraced it. You embraced that idea and said, how can I take that idea and focus it on my narrow niche area that I serve, and how can I do it at a high level? And kudos to you, honestly, for doing that, because you have been able to create that, again, at a high level for a very specific group of people and make it work. So there's such a great lesson to me in what you've done, just in general, to lawyers, because I hear, as I'm sure you do a lot, not just the LegalZoom kind of, online legal documents that people are afraid of. But now, in certain states, are paraprofessionals going to be allowed to do some of the work that lawyers typically do? And that's, how frightening is that? And you need to flip that around, just like you did, and say, okay, so how can I make this work to my advantage? And you certainly have done that. And so I highly recommend to anybody that's listening that has for a second been concerned about, these issues with online legal products, et cetera, to just take a look at what you're doing, because you'll have a whole different view, of it. So,
thank you. I really appreciate you reflecting that back. Here's my view. I mean, a couple things. One, I have a big heart for people that are underserved by our legal marketplace. And so I am a big fan of innovation. It is the only path for meeting those needs. And one of the things that we have not done well as an industry is actually meet the needs of the consumers in the way that they need it. we have just said, here's our model, deal with the model. And this is exactly why we have alternative legal service providers that have been creeping into the edges of the marketplace, is because we are not meeting the needs of the space. And, particularly for individual legal consumers, particularly for small businesses, 90% of small businesses do not get their legal needs met. It's not just like it is the majority of small businesses have unmet legal needs. And that to me is just a reflection of the fact that we have a marketplace that has not evolved at the pace at which it's been required to in order to meet those needs. And so we all need to be thinking creatively about who really are our clients. Do we have different levels of clients? And how can we, because here's the thing that people will never stop wanting, is relationship and access to an expert. When I ask people, so for people that are afraid of like LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer or any of those, right? I ask clients, including like people who were not my client and use those resources and then found me, like, how did you feel after using LegalZoom as a resource? 100% of the time, blank stare, like kind of okay. Like I had one guy say it perfectly when he's like, well, I felt like I hope my parachute will open if I ever need it. And I was like, there you go. That speaks to the level of satisfaction with those resources in the marketplace. They're not for everyone. And while people may try them, they are not meeting the needs of specific groups. It is like a last ditch effort because they're inexpensive. Like, well, at least I'll try this. But as you know, they can cause more harm than good in certain circumstances. And so the thing as lawyers that we are positioned so well to do is educate our clients first before we even sell them anything. And if we just think of our business model less like a legal practice and more like a business, I think we'd be willing to do more of that. I don't know. A lot of attorneys are tremendously generous. I find attorneys to be big-hearted. In my own career of building my practice, I was like, I love attorneys. They're so generous with me. And yet, we have this reputation to battle against. And most people are not, most people, even in law, most attorneys in law are not the big firm cutthroat type of lawyers that make their way onto TV, right? So it's, I just think we have such tremendous opportunity to be the caretakers in our profession, that are educators, that give people the map so that they can make more empowered decisions. I call this breaking the black box legal model, right? If we can just break that model because we can recognize it doesn't work, then it really frees us to educate first, give people the map so that then they go, oh, now I know where I am on the map. Now I can actually make a decision about this particular thing.
Exactly. I mean, people forget, you as the law practice owner, you are in charge of the client journey. And it really is all about the client journey and educating, giving away information. I was a disability lawyer. I gave free seminars all over the place. Right. I wrote a free booklet. It was all about education on the website because people needed to understand the process. And as you said, figure out, oh, here's where I am in the process before they could decide, do I need a lawyer to help me? Yes. And certainly when you educate people like that, when they make the decision that, now I'm at the point where I need a lawyer, who are they going to call? They're going to call you. Mm-hmm. So, but you're right. That's a very different approach to law as a business. Mm-hmm. But lawyers need to understand that it is a business, and through education, that's how you can run a successful business. Yeah.
Well, you think of like, traditional law firms that, I mean, we all know the model. Even me as a former professional photographer, I used to do a lot of portrait photography actually for lawyers because I was in the industry as well. And I love portraiture, but I would just cringe at so many of the law firm websites because it's literally a placeholder. There's no information. It's like,
Right.
aside from like summary of what we do and like really boring faces. I hate to say that, but for the most part, a lot of law firm websites in the past, they're getting it now. A lot of law firms are getting it now. They're actually making some of the changes that we're talking about, but it, for the longest time, it was literally like law firms could sit there and just expect people to show up.
Correct.
Right? That is not, because they
right.
would. That's what it
because
happened.
we're here and we have a combined 300 years of experience. Like, who cares, you know?
Right.
And as you well know, it's all about what can you do to help me with my legal problem that's causing me terrible anxiety and terrible problems in my business and in my life. How can you help me? I don't care that you have all those awards and you're the best in this and you're the best. That's great for you. But how is that going to help me? I mean, your awards are not. Tell me how you're going to help me. And
that's right.
Yeah. And that's a very, very different approach and attitude about what your role is as a lawyer. So.
Well, and even, for people that live in the family law space, there's a gentleman named Forrest Mostyn, however you say his last name. I've had a phone conversation with him and he's a lovely human being. He's like the grandfather of unbundled legal services. So, right, for anybody that starts to study legal models, like I'm such a fan of people like creatively evaluating their services and what can they break apart? Because we're certainly going to have clients that still want the done for you versions of virtually everything that we do, right? But there are you open up access to a whole segment of the marketplace and other people who need real help that you are positioned to serve if you can make some creative modifications to some of your other services, some of your other offerings, some of your, education. And that's where we have the potential to create clients.
Exactly. Great point. That's a great point. So let me ask you this, Heather. This has just been wonderful. You are just a wealth of information and creativity. And I know you are sparking all kinds of ideas for everyone who is listening. So what do you think in terms of running your business? What do you think was like the worst piece of advice you ever got about running your business?
I will say this. I tend to look for advice in interesting places. So I haven't really taken bad business advice from most people. I would say, I've been really benefited by the fact that I am careful in who I choose as a mentor. So that's one, is I really feel like we are all responsible for assessing our own needs and selecting our experts wisely. I think a lot of people will do a thing where they just think like, oh, this person's the expert, they should tell me what to do. My personality doesn't work very well that way. I have to run everything against, my internal, I'm very intuitive and my internal, I get a clear yes or a clear no on most things. And so luckily I've not, that's not to say I haven't made mistakes on my own, right? So I think the number one thing that a lot of small businesses do in general, including attorneys, is they do way too much work themselves. Right. And especially for solos and smalls, like they end up doing more than what should be on their plate and it takes them too long to build team. I include myself in that bucket, right? Even though I'm in the process of building out quite a bit more team than I've had in the past. As a mom to two little people, you throw COVID on top of it. There's lots of ways that we end up doing too much ourselves. So that's one of the high hurdles that we all face. In regards to business advice, I just have to say that I've had very good mentors, but I've chosen them carefully.
And how did you go about doing that? I think that's really important for people to understand. When you say, it's like I pick and choose who I'm going to take advice from. So what do you look for when you're looking for somebody that you think, I think I really have some trust in what they're telling me?
Yeah, one is real alignment with my vision for myself. So I've always been really clear, I think, on what values I hold dear. And any of our decision making really is just a reflection of our values, right? So getting clear on your values can help a lot. And I've always been very, very clear on my values. And lining up. So for example, one of the early mentors in my law school career, who I still am in touch with like today, like literally emailed because I still help him with listserv requests. It's really a funny relationship. So he's basically in retirement and, but he also was a very creative person within the law. And I recognize this about him. And so I was willing to work on his projects because he was not an attorney that was like, look, how many attorneys are terrified of making mistakes, right? It basically runs in our blood.
Yes.
This guy though was like, look, we have to make mistakes in order to grow as attorneys. And so there were really unique things that happened in my career because I chose him to work with, and I continued to be able to support some of the largest projects that his law firms worked on. And I was willing to learn from him in ways that, truthfully could have made others uncomfortable. I'll give you an example. There was a project and it was a boundary line dispute, right? And there are plenty of these in Seattle to go around, but we had some really interesting clients and we were on a site visit this one day, and one of the neighboring property owners came up and had a whole bunch of information to share with us, right?
Yeah.
You can imagine how that could go, and how a lot of attorneys would have handled that, right? Attempting to either shut it down or just say, look, we'll do all of this through discovery, or trying to deflect what was a pretty heated situation. And he sat there and he listened really, really carefully to this person, and he did not interrupt. And like, he did the opposite of what so many attorneys would have been inclined to do. And at the very end, he said, this is new information. Thank you. I'm going to go back and I'm going to review all of this and I'm going to talk to my client. Like, it was just this very open human exchange rather than and that was just one small example of many, but he just had a different approach to the way that he handled cases, the way that he did client work. And while he was an extraordinarily zealous advocate, he was also a wonderful human. And so I think, choosing mentors who model those qualities is really, really important, that you're clear on what you want to develop so that you don't inadvertently become influenced by somebody where you're like, wow, this is such a disconnect from what I'm trying to create.
Yeah, exactly.
And then at other times, like, I've just been really clear on what the sticking point is in my business where I'm like, oh, I need marketing support, or I need very high level business coaching to get my head around this particular issue. And so being able to identify what you need before you go looking for it, I think is also really helpful, because otherwise people can just be pretty easily sold into whatever the next expert says to them, that they, from the outside looking. And it's a little bit like choosing your doctors,
Right.
You go talk to a neurosurgeon, you're going to get a neurosurgeon's perspective on your headaches versus a holistic functional doctor, right? Do you need a spinal tap or do you need a dietary change? Those are pretty drastic differences, right? And so we have to be careful in the same way about who we choose to work with based on what outcome we want.
Exactly. Well, this is wonderful. I could talk to you all day, but this has just been wonderful, wonderful advice. I love your business model. I love the way you got there. It's just been a fascinating conversation. So I really appreciate you coming to talk with me today. Now, if any of the listeners want to get in touch with you, Heather, tell us how they do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome to email me directly. I'm just heather@legalwebsitewarrior.com, just how it sounds. You can obviously visit my online website, which has a lot of resources and information. All of my contact info, including my phone, my emails listed there on the contact page. You're welcome to pop over and join me on my podcast. I have to put a little plug in for my podcast because I love spending time there. Guts, Grit, and Great Business. And that is not a conversation about legal stuff. That is a conversation about business building and, designing businesses and lives that we love. So
wonderful. Yes, I've heard some of the episodes. I love it. It's a great
Oh,
podcast. Yeah, it's
awesome.
a great
Thank you.
podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
fun. So, there's a variety of ways you can connect with me and my content, but of course, reach out directly. I'm a connector by nature and I love it. If you happen to be on LinkedIn, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. That's where I do most of my online connecting from a social network or platform standpoint. So let's connect on LinkedIn, and you can just search me by my full name, Heather Pierce Campbell. Pierce is Pearce. And yeah, I'm pretty much on all the places, but LinkedIn is where I spend the most time when it comes to connecting.
Terrific, terrific. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And I look forward to listening to your podcast and hopefully talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Sharon. So great to be connected.
Yes, you too.